Hi everybody, I'm First Alert Chief Meteorologist McKenna King here at CBS News Texas in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
And I'm Nelly Carreño, one of the new First Alert meteorologists.
And we want to walk you through what's happening in the Texas Hill Country. Of course, we saw the historic flash flooding last year, and here we are a year and just a couple of weeks later, and we are looking at similar flooding in similar areas. Fortunately, so far, the death toll is not what we saw last year. That is the good news, but still causing a lot of destruction, a lot of damage through the Texas Hill Country. So we want to kind of walk you through some of the geology and why this is Flash Flood Alley. This is a designation that has been given from high up. This is known as Flash Flood Alley, one of the worst places in the country for flooding. And this area stretches from the Dallas-Fort Worth area and Waco in East Texas down through places like San Antonio. That stretches into the Hill Country toward places like Uvalde, where we have so far seen more than 2 feet of rainfall just in a 72-hour period, and a few more showers still left to come. So of course you can imagine how much damage and destruction that much rain can do, because you're talking 2+ feet of rain, but that leads rivers to rise much more. So we're going to talk about why that happens and exactly what goes into all of the geology down there.
Exactly. There's a lot of ingredients that come together to cause this kind of catastrophic flooding. As you mentioned, many places in a short period of time got more than 2 feet of rain. 2 feet of rain, because it is a lot different with the total rainfall and the rain rate, right? That's the problem here, is that a lot of places got, in a matter of a couple of hours, anywhere between 8 to 10 inches of rain. But why is it called a flash flood alley? We have to talk about that. It's not just the geology, it also has to do with the weather setup, being so close to the Gulf. So a lot of ingredients come together in order to cause this type of flooding.
So we have this area of low pressure right now, and that spins in a counterclockwise fashion, and that is pulling in all of this Gulf moisture. So the Gulf is full of very warm and moist air and water, and it is pulling all of that into the upper levels of our atmosphere. The best way to describe it is when you walk out and it just feels like you stepped into a sauna. That is quite literally moisture that lives in the air that helps produce these insane rain totals. So when you're sucking in all of that Gulf moisture, and on top of that you have a weather system that is providing the lift and the forcing needed to get some of these showers to set up, they just sort of have to rain themselves out. There's no forcing mechanism to push them into the next state. They are just raining and spinning over the same areas for days, and that's the setup that we're dealing with right now. Now, on top of the weather systems, you're also dealing with very steep terrain in the Hill Country. So this isn't flat like some of the spots that we see closer to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. You get down into the Hill Country, and it's a whole lot of this.
And it's hills.
Yeah. And
that's
so
why it's called Hill Country.
You're talking about the rain falling on the tops of these hills, down the sides of these hills, and it has one place to go, and it is down into those valleys. So you have this very steep terrain. That 6 to 8 inches in a couple-hour period, that's falling all over and flowing into one place, and that is the Guadalupe River, the Del Frio River, and that's what's happening currently. That's what happened last year.
You got the Llano, the Frio, the Nueces, the Guadalupe. Of course, we're talking about the Guadalupe, but there are so many creeks that feed into that, and so that's
big
also
watershed. It's a huge watershed.
Exactly, and it takes a while. Maybe a lot of people think, well, it's not raining as hard, the flash flood emergency is over with, but it actually takes a while for the rivers to crest, and because all of these creeks are feeding into it. And something that a lot of people don't think about, they think they have more time to get out, right? You think, well, they knew it was going to rain, why didn't they get out? Well, in a matter of minutes, you can watch the river that is maybe 30 feet away, and you think, well, I'm going to grab my charger, I'm going to grab my keys, and by the time you look out the window, it is at your doorstep. So it just literally happens. That's why they call it flash flooding. It happens very quickly, and a lot of that is because it's not flat. It is those hills that feed into the creeks that then feed into the rivers.
And the problem is, too, you're not just talking about a hill area. On top of that, we also have to talk about the layers that make up the earth in the Texas Hill Country. So you have soil, of course. You've got your layer of grass, and then you've got your layer of soil. The problem is this is a very shallow layer of soil. So if we're describing that, this is your grass surface. You have soil here, but it's not very deep. You want deep soil to be able to take in all of this rain. We don't have that here. We have a shallow layer of soil, and then we have thick layers of limestone, thick rock that is underneath that soil. Well, of course, rock can't take in all of this water that's falling. So it happens really quickly that we see this rain saturate saturate the soil completely. It happens almost in an instant when you're dealing with this much rain. So then on top of the water rushing down this steep terrain, it's also rushing off of the flat terrain as well, because it's already saturated that soil. It cannot soak into that rock, and so it is quite literally only flowing into those rivers that are down in the hill country, and then it is leading to those big water rises where you can see as much as 2 feet of rain cause the rivers to rise as much as 25 to 30 feet. We saw it last year, we're seeing it again this year, and that is why that just a couple of feet of rain can lead to that much of a river rise.
Exactly. When you're talking about limestone, it's basically like pouring water on concrete. That's what happens. Instead of being soaked in, it goes through the top, and so that's why it happens so quickly. All of that. Obviously, also the fact that it's right next to the Gulf, that is not a good thing, right? So you have all the moisture, you have all the moisture that you need right there, accessible. So as McKenna mentioned, we have this low pressure system, but we also had a boundary that sits right over the area, and then the upper levels, the steering winds are going parallel to it. So we have what meteorologists call training. So I'll explain it this way. In San Antonio this time around, they got less than 2 inches of rain, less than 2 inches. And now all of these places that are just west and northwest of San Antonio got 2 feet of rain. Why does that happen? Because the storms train one, like a choo-choo train, one right after the other. Now, last year, obviously, Kerrville took the brunt of it. And this time, a lot of it came down over into southwestern areas.
Uvalde, places like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
And on top of that, so what we talked about a lot last year with the flooding in Kerrville, of course, a lot of that happened into the overnight hours. And something that you'll hear us talk about here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area is the amplification of the low-level jet when we're talking about tornado coverage in particular for us. Of course, we can see the flooding in North Texas, but down in the hill country, the low-level jet, the problems that can cause there is this is just it's a pressure difference that starts to form in the late evening hours. It's really the witching hour that we call it, just after sunset, where this low-level jet is pumping moisture up to the northwest. And that moisture can also aid in some of that really heavy rain development. That is a similar setup to what we saw last year in Kerrville. Fortunately, a lot of this rain has been more diurnally driven, so it is happening during the day. That makes a world of a difference because people do have more time to plan.
And emergency sirens.
Yes.
This time around, there were some emergency sirens. Obviously, we learned a lot from what happened last year, and all of the people in that area are very alert. Unfortunately, they are also very anxious after what happened, the tragedy that happened last year. But it does seem like the emergency sirens helped this time around, and some of the buildings that are being rebuilt have been a little bit better in order to withstand the flooding.
And I think there's probably a lot of places where the reconstruction hasn't even begun. So there are portions of that riverbed that have not been redeveloped, and maybe for the better. I do think we're seeing, as Nellie touched on, in real time, the reaction to such a historic and catastrophic event that happened last year. Who knew that 1 year later we would be talking a similar setup? We are dealing with more moisture and more warmth in the atmosphere. That is a fact. And so we will likely see some of these real serious events more frequently, and we are seeing this 1 year later, this weather setup that has caused catastrophic flooding in these areas. Fortunately, we're not reporting quite the death tolls. Of course, any loss of life is a tragedy, but we're not seeing quite what we saw last year. The other big difference that we did see in Kerrville was we talk about all of the geography and the topography and all of that in this area. Last year, a lot of this rain was situated right over where the two forks form the Guadalupe River. Yeah, so you're talking the hill country and all of that water, that heavy rain flowing into these two forks. So the forks are already flooded, but then those two forks have to move in to form that narrow Guadalupe River.
And the camp was right there.
Camp Mystic was literally right there on that riverbed, and that camp is not operating this year.
Thank God.
Thank goodness, because look at the river rises that we've already seen in spots like Kerrville. The water has been incredibly high in that area yet again, higher in Uvalde, but still we're talking upwards and close to 2 feet in spots close to Kerrville, and that can, of course, lead to those river rises that are 25, 30 feet just from a couple of feet of rain. It's really crazy to wrap your mind around, but when you just think about all of that runoff from all of those different showers, that's what it can do in these areas.
Right, and I think so important, just a reminder for all of us to always have a weather radio. I have a weather radio with batteries in it, right? You never know when you need to get those alerts, so make sure that you have your phone charged, that you can get those weather alerts. Flash flooding happens in a flash, and that's why you really need to be prepared.
Yeah, it's the matter of literally seconds that can make all of the difference. So some of those ways to stay prepared, weather radios are huge. There's been a lot of talk in the last year about weather sirens and emergency sirens being installed in this area. Those are helpful, but those are only meant for use if you are outside and in the vicinity of those sirens. So they're being installed along the riverbeds, but what if you're not close enough to hear them? That water is still rising, and so having that weather radio, that is one of the best ways to make sure you're receiving those weather alerts. They make them battery powered, they make them solar powered. You can take them with you if you're headed camping. Getting a weather radio is the #1 recommendation I would have to make sure you're being prepared. On top of that, you have your cell phone. Nowadays, we get all of these alerts. The problem you run into is, what if I don't have service?
Exactly.
What if I lose service? That weather radio is going to transmit that signal to you wherever you are. Just select your county and it is going to give you those alerts. And that is the best piece of advice I think we could give you to take away from these flood events, should they happen a little bit closer to where you are. Anything you've got left?
No, it just, we become desensitized to flash flood warnings, and this is another reminder that you have to take them seriously.
You have to take them very seriously. Thanks for joining us on YouTube. Let us know if you want us to talk about any other explainers.